The orc woman's face was the color of ash beneath her green skin when she pitched forward into the freshly turned earth, her borrowed plow clattering beside her like discarded iron bones. Camden Holt had been mending the fence along his northern property line when he heard the heavy thud carry across the morning air. He dropped his hammer without thinking, vaulting the split-rail fence with a speed that surprised him for a man past 30 winters. His boots ate up the distance across the fallow field, and when he reached her, his breath caught in his throat at the sight. She was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders broad as an ox yoke and arms corded with muscle that spoke of years of hard labor. Her skin was a deep forest green, darker along her forearms and lighter at her throat, and 2 small tusks curved up from her lower jaw. Her black hair had been tied back in a practical braid, now come loose and tangled with dirt. She was breathing, but barely. Camden could see the shallow rise and fall of her chest, and when he knelt beside her, he felt the fever radiating from her skin like heat from a forge. Her clothes were threadbare, patched so many times the original fabric was barely visible, and her feet were wrapped in cloth bindings instead of proper boots. He looked across the field and recognized it as the old Thornberry plot, abandoned these 3 years since the family had moved east to the capital. Someone had been trying to work it, turning over soil that had gone to seed and weed. Camden did not hesitate. He had carried wounded men from battlefields during his conscription years, and though this orc woman probably outweighed those soldiers by a good margin, the principle was the same. He worked his arms beneath her, one under her shoulders and one under her knees, and lifted with his legs. She was heavy as promised, solid muscle and bone, but adrenaline lent him strength. Her head lolled against his shoulder as he carried her across the field, through the gap in the fence and toward his farmhouse. His dog, a shaggy gray beast named Barley, started barking as Camden approached, but quieted at a sharp word. Camden kicked the door open and carried the orc woman inside, laying her as gently as he could on his bed. It was the only proper bed in the house, a sturdy frame he had built himself with a corn husk mattress and wool blankets his sister had woven. The orc woman looked strange there, too large for the space, her feet hanging off the end of the mattress. Camden touched her forehead and swore under his breath. The fever was worse than he had thought, the kind that could kill if left unchecked. He had seen it before, during the war, soldiers who pushed themselves too hard on too little food and water until their bodies simply gave out. He grabbed his water bucket and the cleanest cloth he had, dunking it in the cool well water and wringing it out before placing it on her forehead. Her eyes flickered open for just a moment, pale yellow like amber caught in sunlight, and they fixed on him with such intensity that he almost stepped back. Her lips moved, forming words in a language he did not understand, harsh consonants and rolling vowels that sounded like stone grinding against stone. Then her eyes closed again, and she went still. Camden spent the rest of that day tending her. He changed the cloth on her forehead every hour, trying to bring the fever down. He managed to get some water past her lips, though most of it dribbled down her chin. He examined her hands and found them calloused and cracked, with fresh blisters that had burst and bled. She had been working that field for days, maybe weeks, without gloves or proper tools. As the sun began to set, Camden lit his oil lamp and pulled his chair close to the bed. He studied her face in the flickering light. She was not what he had expected. The stories told about orcs painted them as monsters, savage raiders who descended from the mountains to pillage and burn. But this woman looked exhausted, worn down by hunger and labor. There were hollows beneath her cheekbones, and her collarbone stood out too sharply beneath her skin. When had she last eaten a proper meal? Camden rose and went to his pantry. He had vegetable stew left from yesterday, thick with potatoes and carrots and beans. He reheated it over his fire and mashed it into something closer to porridge, thin enough that she might be able to swallow it even in her current state. He sat on the edge of the bed and lifted her head, spooning tiny amounts into her mouth and waiting to make sure she swallowed. It was slow, painstaking work, and he only managed to get perhaps a cup of food into her before she turned her head away, mumbling in that strange language again. He settled back in his chair, watching her breathe. Barley padded over and rested his head on Camden's knee, and Camden scratched behind the dog's ears absently. Outside, the night sounds of the farm rose up. Chickens settling into their roost, his 2 milk cows lowing softly in their barn, the distant cry of an owl hunting in the woods beyond his property. Camden must have dozed off, because he jerked awake to find gray dawn light filtering through his window. The orc woman was still asleep, but when he touched her forehead, the fever had broken. Her skin was still warm but no longer burning. He felt something in his chest unclench, a tension he had not fully acknowledged until it released. He went about his morning chores in a daze. The cows needed milking, the chickens needed feeding, and he had to check his own fields. Spring planting was still weeks away, but there was always work to be done on a farm. He found himself hurrying through tasks that normally received his full attention, anxious to get back to the house and check on his unexpected guest. When he returned at mid-morning, she was awake. She had pushed herself up to sit against the wall, and her yellow eyes tracked him as he entered. There was wariness in her gaze, but also confusion. She said something in her language, a question by the tone of it. Camden held up his hands, palms out, trying to show he meant no harm. "Easy," he said. "You collapsed in the field. I brought you here. You have been sick." She stared at him for a long moment, then spoke again, slower this time. When he shook his head, not understanding, she switched to common, heavily accented but clear enough. Why what?" Camden asked. "Why bring me here?" Her voice was deeper than a human woman's, with a rough edge like gravel. "Why help?" Camden blinked. "Because you needed help. You were dying out there." She looked around the small house, taking in the single room with its cooking area, the table with 2 chairs, the bed where she sat. Her gaze lingered on the few personal items he owned, a shelf with his books, another with his mother's good dishes, the sword he had brought back from his conscription hanging on the wall. "You live alone," she said. It was not a question. "I do," Camden confirmed. "Have for 5 years since my father passed. No wife, no," she absorbed this, her expression unreadable. "I am Drusila," she said finally, "of the Broken Tusk clan, or I was. They cast me out." "Camden Holt," he replied, "and this is my farm. Why were you working the thornberry field?" Drusilla looked down at her hands, at the raw blisters and calluses. "It was empty, abandoned. I thought if I could plant it, grow food, I could stay. I could survive the summer." "That field has not been properly worked in 3 years," Camden said. "The soil is exhausted. Even if you had planted, you would have gotten poor yield." "I know nothing of farming," Drusilla admitted. Her voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "But I had to try. I have nowhere else to go." Camden pulled out one of his chairs and sat down. "Why did your clan cast you out?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment he thought she would not answer. Then she said, "I refused to raid a human village. The elders said we needed food for the winter, that the humans had plenty and would not miss what we took. I said it was wrong to steal from those who had not harmed us. They called me weak, soft, a traitor to my people." She met his eyes. "They were right to cast me out. I do not belong with them anymore." Camden thought about that. He thought about the stories he had been told growing up about orc raiders burning farms and killing families. He thought about the men he had fought beside during his conscription, men who spoke of orcs with hatred and fear. And he thought about this woman sitting in his bed, half-starved and exhausted, who had been exiled for refusing to hurt humans. "You need to eat," he said finally, "and rest. We can figure out the rest later." Drusila's expression shifted, something uncertain crossing her face. "You would let me stay?" "Until you are well enough to travel, at least," Camden said. "After that, we will see." He brought her more stew, a proper bowl this time, and she ate it slowly, methodically, as though afraid it might disappear if she looked away. He noticed she was careful not to spill a single drop, sopping up every last bit with the bread he provided. When she finished, she handed the bowl back to him with both hands, a gesture that seemed formal ritual. "Thank you," she said. The words came out awkward, as though she was not used to saying them. Camden nodded. "Can you stand?" "You should probably try to move around a bit. Keep your blood flowing." Drusila swung her legs over the side of the bed, and Camden was struck again by her size. When she stood, the top of his head barely reached her shoulder. She swayed for a moment, and he moved to steady her, his hand on her arm. Her skin was warm and smooth, the muscle beneath it like iron. "I am all right," she said, but she did not pull away from his touch. She took a few experimental steps, testing her balance, and Camden stayed close in case she fell. But she was steadier than he had expected, and after a moment she released a breath. "Better." "Good," Camden said. "Listen, I need to go into town this afternoon. I have supplies to pick up. Will you be all right here alone?" Something flickered in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or anticipation of betrayal. "You will not tell them I am here?" "No," Camden said. "That is your business, not theirs." She studied his face as though trying to determine if he was lying. Finally, she nodded. "I will be fine." Camden left her there and hitched up his wagon. The ride into town took an hour, the road rutted and muddy from recent rains. He thought about Drusila the entire way, about the choice he was making by helping her. In the 12 years since the war had ended, the peace between humans and orcs had been tenuous at best. There were treaties, trade agreements, but the hatred ran deep on both sides. If his neighbors discovered he was harboring an orc, there would be trouble. But Camden had seen too much death during his conscription to turn his back on someone who needed help. He had held dying men, both human and orc, and their blood had looked the same. Their cries had sounded the same. War had taught him that the line between monster and man was thinner than most people wanted to admit. He picked up his supplies in town, flour and salt and nails, and managed to avoid too much conversation. Old Merrick at the general store tried to gossip about the spring planting and which families were struggling, but Camden pleaded work waiting and made his escape. On the way home, he stopped by the thornberry field and examined the work Drusila had done. She had managed to plow nearly a quarter of the field, the earth turned in rough furrows. It was amateur work, but earnest, the labor of someone who had never held a plow but was determined to learn. When he returned to the farm, he found Drusila outside, sitting on the bench by his door with barley at her feet. The dog had his head in her lap, and she was stroking his ears with a gentleness that surprised Camden. She looked up as he approached, and there was something vulnerable in her expression, quickly hidden. "Your dog is friendly," she said. "He is a good judge of character," Camden replied, unloading his wagon. Drusila rose and moved to help him, lifting sacks of flour as though they weighed nothing. Together they carried everything inside, and Camden noted that some of the tension had left her shoulders. She was still wary, but less so than before. That evening, Camden made dinner for both of them, a simple meal of fried potatoes and bacon. Drusila ate, with the same careful attention as before, but this time she looked less like she expected the food to vanish. They sat across from each other at his small table, and Camden found himself watching the way the lamplight caught in her dark hair, the way her tusks caught on her lower lip when she chewed. "Tell me about your clan," he said. "What was it like?" Drusila was quiet for a moment, and he thought she might not answer. Then she said, "We lived in the foothills, in caves that had been carved by our ancestors generations ago. There were perhaps 50 of us. We hunted mostly and gathered what we could. In winter, when food was scarce, we would raid human settlements." She paused. "I went on raids when I was younger, before I understood what it meant." "What changed?" Camden asked. "I saw a human child," Drusila said softly. "We had broken into a farmhouse and I was searching for food. I found her hiding in a cupboard. She could not have been more than 5 summers old, and she looked at me with such terror." She swallowed hard. "I closed the cupboard and walked away. I told no one I had seen her, but after that I could not raid anymore. I could not be part of that fear." Camden felt something shift in his chest. "That took courage." Drusila shook her head. "It was weakness. That is what the elders said." "The elders were wrong," Camden said firmly. "It takes more strength to refuse violence than to embrace it. I learned that during the war." "You fought in the war?" Drusila asked. "I did. I was conscripted when I was 18, served for 3 years on the northern border, saw more blood than I care to remember." He looked down at his hands, at the old scars that marked them. "When I came home, I swore I would never raise a weapon against another living thing unless I had no choice. That is why I farm. The land does not ask you to kill." "But you kept your sword," Drusila observed, glancing at the wall where it hung. "As a reminder," Camden said, "of who I was and who I choose to be now." They fell into silence, but it was not uncomfortable. Outside, the spring peepers had begun their nightly chorus, and the smell of turned earth drifted through the open window. Camden cleared the dishes and Drusila helped, and they moved around each other with an ease that surprised him. When everything was clean and put away, Camden pulled out his bedroll. "You take the bed again tonight," he said. "I will sleep here by the fire." "That is not right," Drusila protested. "This is your home, your bed. And you are my guest," Camden said. "Besides, you are still recovering. You need proper rest." Drusila looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion was evident in the set of her shoulders. She nodded reluctantly and moved to the bed. Camden turned away to give her privacy as she settled in, and he heard the creak of the ropes beneath the mattress. When he looked back, she was lying on her side, watching him with those amber eyes. "Camden Holt," she said quietly, "I will repay this kindness, I swear it." "There is nothing to repay," Camden said. "Just rest." He lay down on his bedroll, Barley curling up beside him, and listened to Drusila's breathing slow and deepen as she fell asleep. He stared at the ceiling beams, at the shadows cast by the dying fire, and wondered what he had gotten himself into. The next morning, Camden woke to find Drusila already up and outside. He pulled on his boots and stepped into the cool dawn air to find her examining his vegetable garden. It was still mostly empty, just the early greens he had planted a few weeks ago, but she was studying it with intense focus. "This is well made," she said when she noticed him. "The rows are straight. The soil is good." "Thank you," Camden said. "I have been working this land since I was a boy." "You learn what it needs." "Will you teach me?" Drusila asked. The question came out tentative, almost shy. "About farming. If I am to survive on my own, I need to know how to grow food." Camden considered her. "I could do that, but it would take time." "Farming is not something you learn in a few days." "I have time," Drusila said. "If you will let me stay, I will work. I will earn my keep." Camden thought about the thornberry field, about all the work that lay ahead with spring planting. He thought about the fact that he ran this farm alone, that there were always more tasks than hours in the day. And he thought about the look in Drusila's eyes, the desperate hope barely concealed. "All right," he said. "You can stay. You work, you learn, and you eat at my table. Fair." "Fair," Drusila agreed, and for the first time since he had found her, she smiled. It was a small thing, barely a curve of her lips, but it transformed her face. They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Camden taught Drusila the rhythms of farm work, starting with the basics. How to tell good soil from bad, how to plant seeds at the proper depth, how to read the sky for coming rain. She learned with a focus that impressed him, asking questions and listening carefully to his answers. She was strong, stronger than any human he had ever met, and work that would have taken him hours she completed in half the time. But she was also gentle in unexpected ways. She was careful with the chickens, moving slowly so as not to startle them. She learned to milk the cows with patient hands, and the animals quickly grew comfortable with her presence. Barley followed her everywhere, his tail wagging whenever she appeared. In the evenings, they would sit together and share meals. Camden taught Drusila to read, using his small collection of books. She struggled with the letters at first, her large fingers clumsy on the pages, but she persisted. He learned words in her language in exchange, the harsh syllables feeling strange in his mouth. She laughed at his pronunciation, a deep, genuine sound that made his chest feel warm. As the weeks turned into months, Camden found himself growing accustomed to her presence. The farmhouse felt less empty with another person in it, and he realized he had been lonely without quite admitting it to himself. Drusila, for her part, seemed to bloom under regular meals and honest work. The hollows in her cheeks filled out, and her skin took on a healthier sheen. She laughed more easily, and Camden discovered she had a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. One evening in late spring, they were working together in the garden, planting tomatoes and beans, when Drusila suddenly went still. Camden looked up to see her staring toward the road, her whole body tense. Following her gaze, he saw 3 riders approaching, their horses moving at a steady trot. "Inside," Camden said quietly. "Now." Drusila did not argue. She rose and slipped into the house, and Camden wiped his hands on his trousers and walked out to meet the riders. He recognized them as they drew closer. Thomas Merrick, the general store owner's son, and 2 of his friends, all young men in their early 20s with more swagger than sense. "Camden," Thomas called out as they reined in their horses. "Afternoon." "Afternoon," Camden replied neutrally. "What brings you out this way?" "Just riding the property lines," Thomas said. "Father mentioned he saw smoke from the Thornberry place a few days back. We thought we would check it out, make sure no vagrants have moved in." Camden kept his expression carefully blank. "I have not seen anyone." Thomas's eyes were sharp, calculating. "You sure about that? We heard tell there might be orcs in the area. Some of the farms further north reported missing livestock." "I have not had any trouble," Camden said, which was true if not complete. One of Thomas's friends, a stocky man named Walter, leaned forward in his saddle. "You would tell us if you saw anything, right, Camden?" "I mean, we all have to look out for each other. Orcs are dangerous." "I know what orcs are," Camden said, and there was an edge to his voice now. "I fought them during the war. If I see any trouble, you will be the first to know." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, then. We will be moving on. You take care, Camden." They rode off, and Camden watched until they were out of sight before returning to the house. He found Drusila standing by the window, her arms wrapped around herself. "They are looking for me," she said. "They are looking for orcs," Camden corrected. "They do not know about you specifically." "It is only a matter of time," Drusila said. "I should leave. I am putting you in danger." "No," Camden said, surprised by the vehemence in his own voice. "You are not going anywhere." Drusila turned to look at him, her yellow eyes searching his face. "Why? Why are you protecting me?" Camden opened his mouth, then closed it. "Because you deserve protection," he wanted to say. "Because you work harder than anyone I have ever met. Because the sound of your laugh makes me smile. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being about charity and became about something else entirely. Because it is the right thing to do," he said instead. Drusilla's expression softened, and she stepped closer to him. They were standing very near now, close enough that Camden could see the fine scales that patterned her skin, the flecks of gold in her amber eyes. His heart was beating too fast, and he wondered if she could hear it. "Camden," she said softly, and the way she said his name made something in his chest ache. The moment stretched between them, fragile and electric. Then Barley barked outside, chasing a squirrel, and they both stepped back, the spell broken. That night, Camden lay awake on his bedroll and admitted to himself what he had been avoiding for weeks. He cared about Drusila, not as a guest, not as someone he was helping out of obligation, but as a woman. He thought about her constantly. He found excuses to work beside her, to hear her voice, to see her smile. The thought of her leaving made his chest tighten with something close to panic. But what could come of it? She was an orc, he was human. Their peoples had been at war for generations. Even now, in peacetime, the prejudice ran deep. If anyone discovered how he felt, they would call him a traitor, a pervert, worse. And Drusila herself, what did she feel? Gratitude, certainly. But anything beyond that, summer arrived with its long hot days and short warm nights. The crops grew tall and green, and Camden's fields flourished under Drusila's tireless labor. She had learned quickly, her natural intelligence and determination making up for her lack of experience. The thornberry field, which they had planted together in early spring, was now showing rows of corn and wheat. It would not be a rich harvest, but it would be enough to feed one person through the winter. One afternoon, they were working together to repair the barn roof. Camden was up on the ladder, replacing rotten shingles, while Drusila handed him materials from below. The sun was merciless, and sweat ran down Camden's back, soaking his shirt. He reached down for another shingle, and his hand brushed against Drusila's. The contact sent a jolt through him, and he nearly dropped the shingle. "Careful," Drusila said, steadying his hand with her own. Her palm was warm and calloused, her grip strong. Camden looked down at her, at the concern in her eyes, and the words slipped out before he could stop them. "Drusila, I need to tell you something." She tilted her head, waiting, but before he could continue they heard the sound of horses again, many of them this time. Camden climbed down the ladder quickly, his heart sinking. A group of riders was approaching, at least a dozen men, and at their head was Thomas Merrick and his father. "Stay calm," Camden murmured to Drusila. "Let me handle this." But it was too late for hiding. The riders had already seen her, and Camden heard the shouts of alarm, saw men reaching for weapons. He stepped in front of Drusila, his hands raised. "Stop," he called out. "She is with me. She is not a threat." The riders pulled up in a semicircle around them, and old Merrick dismounted, his face hard. "Camden Holt, have you lost your mind? That is an orc." "Her name is Drusila," Camden said firmly, "and she is my guest. She has been helping me work my farm." "Helping you," Thomas scoffed. "Camden, she is probably scouting for a raid. You have put all of us in danger." "I have done no such thing," Drusila said, her voice cutting through the commotion. "I am alone, I have no clan, I wish no harm to anyone. And we are just supposed to take your word for that," Walter called out. "You are an orc. Your kind murdered my uncle during the war. And humans killed my mother," Drusila shot back. but I do not hold every human responsible for her death." The crowd muttered at that, some angry, some uncertain. Camden could feel the situation spiraling out of control. He looked around at his neighbors, at men he had known his entire life, and saw fear and hatred in their eyes. "Listen to me," Camden said, raising his voice. "I know you are afraid. I understand. But Drusila has been here for months, working alongside me, and she has done nothing but help. She is not your enemy." "How can you be sure?" old Merrick demanded. "How can any of us be sure?" "Because I know her," Camden said. "Because I trust her. And if that is not good enough for you, then you will have to go through me to get to her." The silence that followed was heavy. Camden saw shock on the faces around him and something else, a dawning realization. Thomas was looking between Camden and Drusila with narrowed eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was cold. "You care about her," Thomas said, "don't you? It is not just about helping someone in need. You have feelings for her." Camden felt his face heat, but he met Thomas's gaze steadily. "What I feel is my business." "It is all of our business when it puts us at risk," old Merrick said. "Camden, I have known you since you were a boy. Your father was a good man, but this is madness. You need to send that creature away before something terrible happens." "She is not a creature," Camden said, his voice hard. "She is a person, and I will not send her away." The riders exchanged glances, and Camden could see them considering their options. His hand moved unconsciously to his side, where he would have worn a sword during the war. He had no weapon now, but he would fight with his bare hands if he had to. Then Drusila stepped forward, moving to stand beside him rather than behind him. "I will leave," she said quietly. "I do not want to cause trouble. Camden has been kind to me, kinder than I deserved. I will not repay that kindness by bringing violence to his door." "No," Camden said immediately. "You are not leaving." "Camden." Drusila turned to look at him, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "It is all right. This was always going to happen. I knew I could not stay forever." "You are staying," Camden said, and he reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I do not care what anyone thinks. You are staying." The gesture did not go unnoticed. There were gasps, angry mutters. Old Merrick looked like he had bitten into something sour. But Camden did not let go of Drusila's hand. He held on tight as though he could anchor her to this place through sheer will. "Camden, you are making a mistake," old Merrick said heavily. "But I can see you are determined. So here is what is going to happen. That orc can stay for now. But if there is any trouble, any at all, she goes, and you will be held responsible. Do you understand?" It was not the outcome Camden had hoped for, but it was better than violence. He nodded. "Understood." The riders turned and left, though several of them cast dark looks over their shoulders. Camden and Drusila stood together, watching them go, and Camden realized he was still holding her hand. He looked down at their intertwined fingers, green skin against pale, and felt something settle in his chest. "You should not have done that," Drusila said softly. "Probably not," Camden agreed. "But I am glad I did." She looked up at him, and there was something raw and open in her expression. Why do you care so much?" This time Camden did not hesitate. "Because I love you," he said. "I think I have loved you since the day I found you in that field, and I am tired of pretending otherwise." Drusila's breath caught. "Camden, you cannot. I am an orc. You are human. There is no future for us." "I do not believe that," Camden said. "We will make our own future." "Your neighbors already hate me," Drusila said. "If they find out you love me, they will hate you too. You will lose everything." "Then I will lose everything," Camden said simply. "But I will not lose you, not if I have a choice." Tears spilled down Drusila's cheeks, and she reached up with her free hand to touch his face. Her palm was warm against his skin, and he leaned into the touch. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been so afraid to admit it." afraid of what it would mean. Camden closed the distance between them, wrapping his arms around her. She was tall and strong, but she folded into his embrace as though she belonged there. He felt her shaking, and he held her tighter, pressing his face into her hair. It smelled like sunshine and earth, like honest work and growing things. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other as the sun sank lower in the sky. Finally, Drusila pulled back just enough to look at him. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now," Camden smiled. "Now we go inside and have dinner. And tomorrow we get back to work. The crops do not care about our problems." Drusila laughed, a watery sound, and nodded, practical as always. They went inside together, and that night Camden did not sleep on his bedroll. He lay beside Drusila in the bed they now shared, her head resting on his chest, his arms around her. They talked late into the night about their fears and hopes, about the future they wanted to build together. And when they finally fell asleep, it was to the sound of each other's breathing, steady and sure. The weeks that followed were not easy. True to old Merrick's word, some of Camden's neighbors remained hostile. A few refused to speak to him in town, and he noticed prices at the general store had gone up for him specifically. But others, to his surprise, were more accepting. Martha Colby, whose farm bordered his to the south, came by one afternoon with a basket of preserves and a cautious smile. "I wanted to meet her properly," Martha said, nodding toward Drusila, who was working in the garden. "If she is important to you, Camden, then I should know her." Camden introduced them, and Martha and Drusila talked for over an hour, Martha asking questions about Orc culture and Drusila answering with careful honesty. When Martha left, she shook Drusila's hand and told her she was welcome to visit any time. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Other visitors followed. Not many, but enough. People who remembered Camden as a good man, who were willing to give Drusila a chance. And Drusila, for her part, won them over with her earnestness and work ethic. She helped Martha repair a broken wagon wheel, taught the Colby children how to whittle, and volunteered to help with the harvest on several neighboring farms. Summer turned to autumn, and the harvest came in rich and plentiful. Camden and Drusila worked side by side, bringing in wheat and corn and vegetables. The thornberry field, too, yielded its crop, and they spent days storing food for the winter. Camden's cellar was fuller than it had been in years, packed with jars of preserves and bins of potatoes and onions. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Camden reached into his pocket and pulled out a small carved box. Drusila looked at it curiously as he opened it, revealing a simple ring made of braided silver wire. "It was my mother's," Camden said. "She wore it every day until she died. My father gave it to her when they were married." Drusila's eyes widened. "Camden, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I want to marry you," Camden said. "I know we cannot do it in a church, and I know most people will not recognize it, but I do not care about any of that. I want you to be my wife. I want to build a life with you here on this farm. I want to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my days." He paused. "If you will have me." Drusila was crying again, but she was smiling too. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Camden slipped the ring onto her finger, and though it was too small for her larger hands, she wore it on her smallest finger and swore she would never take it off. They kissed then, a soft, sweet kiss that tasted of salt and joy, and Camden felt a completeness he had never known before. They were married the next day in the simplest ceremony imaginable. They stood together in the garden, with Barley as their only witness, and spoke vows to each other. Camden promised to love and protect Drusila for as long as he lived. Drusila promised the same, her voice steady and clear. They sealed their vows with another kiss, and Camden felt the rightness of it down to his bones. That night, They lay together as husband and wife, learning each other in the gentle darkness. Camden marveled at Drusilla's strength, at the softness hidden beneath her hard exterior. Drusila traced the scars on Camden's body, each one a story from his past, and told him she loved every part of who he was. They moved together with awkward tenderness, and when it was over, they held each other and whispered promises into the dark. Winter came, bringing snow and cold winds. Camden and Drusila spent the short days working on indoor projects, repairing tools and mending clothes. In the evenings, they read together or played simple games. Camden taught Drusila to play chess, using pieces he carved from wood, and she proved a quick study, beating him more often than not. They were warm and well-fed, insulated from the cold by thick walls and each other's company. One particularly harsh night, there was a knock on the door. Camden opened it to find Thomas Merrick standing there, his face pinched with cold. Behind him, Camden could see a wagon, and huddled in it were several figures. "What is this?" Camden asked warily. "My family," Thomas said. "Our barn collapsed under the snow. All our stored feed is buried, and we have no shelter for the animals. Father sent me to ask for help." He looked uncomfortable, his pride clearly warring with his need. "I know we have not been kind to you, but we have nowhere else to turn." Camden looked back at Drusila, who had come to stand beside him. She met his gaze and nodded slightly. Camden turned back to Thomas. "Bring your animals to our barn. There is room, and your family can sleep in here tonight. We will figure out something more permanent in the morning." Relief washed over Thomas's face. "Thank you, Camden, truly." They spent the next several hours getting the Merrick family settled. Drusila helped move livestock, her strength making the work quick. She brought blankets and hot food, and she treated the Merrick children with gentle kindness, easing their fears. Old Merrick, watching her, grew quiet and thoughtful. In the morning, Camden and Drusila helped the Merricks repair their barn. It took 3 days of hard work, but when it was done, the structure was sound and stronger than before. As the Merrick family prepared to return home, old Merrick pulled Camden aside. "I owe you an apology," he said gruffly. "And I owe her one too. I judged her unfairly. She is a good woman, orc or not." "She is," Camden agreed. Old Merrick hesitated, then said, "For what it is worth, you have my blessing, both of you." It was not much, but it was something. Camden shook the older man's hand, and when he told Drusila later, she smiled that rare, radiant smile that made his heart soar. Spring came again, bringing new life to the land. Camden and Drusila planted their fields together, working in comfortable partnership. This year, they planted the thornberry field as well, having come to an arrangement with the family that they would work the land and share the harvest. Word of their marriage, such as it was, had spread through the community, and reactions were mixed. Some people remained hostile, but many others had softened, won over by Drusila's character and Camden's steadfast loyalty. One warm afternoon, Martha Colby came by with news. "There is talk in town," she said. "Some families are saying that if an orc and a human can make a marriage work, maybe the peace can last. Some are even talking about reaching out to the orc clans, establishing real trade instead of just avoiding each other." Camden felt a surge of hope. "Do you think it will happen?" "I do not know," Martha admitted, "but it is a start. You two have shown people something different, something possible." After she left, Camden found Drusila in the garden, her hands in the soil, planting tomatoes. He knelt beside her and took her hand. "Did you hear that?" "I did," Drusila said softly. "Do you think we really made a difference?" "I think we showed people that love can cross any divide," Camden said, "and that is worth something." Drusila turned to him, and there was wonder in her eyes. "I never thought I would have this," she said. "A home." a husband who loves me, a place where I belong. You will always belong here, Camden said. With me. They kissed there in the garden, surrounded by growing things, and Camden felt the truth of his words settle into his heart. This was his life now, built from kindness and courage and stubborn determination. It was not the life he had imagined as a young man, but it was better, richer, fuller. As summer approached, Drusila began to show signs that she was with child. Camden noticed she was eating more, that her normally flat stomach was beginning to round. When he asked her about it, she confirmed his suspicions with a shy smile. "I was not sure when to tell you," she admitted. "I did not know how you would feel." Camden pulled her into his arms, his heart so full it ached. "I feel like the luckiest man alive," he said. "We are going to be parents." They spent the next months preparing. Camden built a cradle from oak, carving patterns into the wood with painstaking care. Drusila sewed blankets and clothes, her large fingers surprisingly nimble with needle and thread. They talked about names, about how to raise a child who was both human and orc, about the world they hoped to build for their baby. The birth came in late autumn, as the leaves were turning gold and red. It was a difficult labor, lasting through the night and into the next day. Camden held Drusila's hand, wiping sweat from her brow, murmuring encouragement. Martha Colby served as midwife, her steady presence a comfort. And finally, as the sun was setting, the baby came into the world with a lusty cry. "A girl," Martha announced, placing the squirming infant in Drusila's arms. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Camden looked down at his daughter and felt tears blur his vision. She was tiny, with skin that was a pale green, not as dark as her mother's but distinct. She had Drusila's pointed ears and his nose, and when she opened her eyes, they were a warm brown flecked with amber. "She is perfect," Camden whispered. "She is ours," Drusila said, and her voice was full of wonder. They named her Linnea after Camden's mother. She was a loud baby, demanding and strong, and Camden and Drusila fell into the exhausting rhythm of new parenthood. Sleepless nights blurred into busy days, but Camden had never been happier. Watching Drusila with their daughter, seeing the fierce love in her eyes, he felt complete in a way he had never imagined possible. Linnea grew quickly, thriving under her parents' care. By her first birthday, she was already walking, her sturdy legs carrying her around the farmhouse at surprising speed. She had her mother's strength and her father's curiosity, and she kept both of them constantly on their toes. The community, too, had grown more accepting. Linnea was a visible symbol of what was possible, and people who had been skeptical began to change their minds. Children who had been taught to fear orcs played with Linnea without hesitation. Adults who had held onto old prejudices found them harder to maintain in the face of a laughing toddler. One day, a rider came to the farm, but this time it was not a threat. It was a messenger from the capital, bearing a letter with an official seal. Camden broke it open and read in amazement that the governor was establishing a commission to improve human-orc relations, and they wanted to speak with him and Drusila about their experiences. "They want us to help," Camden said, looking up at Drusila. "They think our story can make a difference." Drusila was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "If we can help, we should, for Linnea's sake if nothing else. I want her to grow up in a world where she does not have to hide what she is." Camden nodded. "Then we will go together." They traveled to the capital the next month, leaving Linnea in Martha's capable care. The city was overwhelming after the quiet of the farm, full of noise and people and buildings that seemed to scrape the sky. But they were received warmly by the commission, and Camden and Drusila spent hours telling their story. They spoke of the prejudice they had faced, but also of the kindness they had found. They talked about the work that still needed to be done, the bridges that still needed to be built. When they returned home, they found that word of their testimony had spread. More people were talking about peace, about cooperation between humans and orcs. It was slow work and there were setbacks, but there was progress too. Trade routes were established. Emissaries were exchanged. And slowly, cautiously, the two peoples began to see each other not as enemies, but as potential allies. Years passed. Linnea grew into a bright, confident young woman, proud of both her heritages. Camden and Drusila continued to farm, their land prosperous and productive. They took in other outcasts when they could, offering refuge to those who did not fit neatly into either human or orc society. Their farm became known as a place of welcome, a symbol of what was possible when people chose love over fear. On their 10th anniversary, Camden and Drusila stood together in the same garden where they had spoken their vows. They were older now, with gray in Camden's hair and fine lines around Drusila's eyes. But they held each other with the same tenderness as the first time, and when they kissed, it was with the deep affection of two people who had built a life together. "You ever regret it?" Camden asked softly. "Staying here, choosing this life?" Drusila shook her head. "Never. You gave me everything I thought I could never have. A home, a family, a place to belong. How could I regret that?" "I feel the same," Camden said. "You changed my life, Drusila. You taught me that love is stronger than hate, that courage is choosing kindness even when it is hard. I am a better man because of you. And I am a better woman because of you," Drusila replied. She touched his face gently. "We have built something good here, Camden, something that will last." They turned to look at their farm, at the fields they had planted and the house they had made a home. They saw Linnea playing with Barley's grandpup, her laughter carrying on the wind. They saw neighbors working together in the distance, human and orc side by side. And they saw the future they had fought for, imperfect but hopeful. Camden pulled Drusila close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. They stood like that as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because love, real love, was not just about grand gestures or passionate declarations. It was about showing up every day. It was about working side by side through heat and cold. It was about choosing each other over and over, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. And Camden and Drusila had chosen each other from the very beginning. From that moment when a farmer found an orc woman collapsed in a field that was not hers and carried her inside. That single act of kindness had blossomed into something neither of them could have imagined. A love that crossed boundaries and challenged assumptions. A love that changed not just two lives but an entire community. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Camden and Drusila walked hand in hand back to their house. Inside, there would be dinner to prepare and evening chores to finish. There would be stories to tell Linnea and plans to make for tomorrow. There would be all the small, ordinary moments that made up a life. But there would also be love, constant and unwavering, the foundation on which everything else was built. And that, Camden thought as he held the door open for his wife, was more than enough. It was everything. They stepped inside together, closing the door behind them, and the farmhouse glowed warm with lamplight against the gathering dark. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new joys. But tonight they had this moment, this peace, this certainty that they were exactly where they belonged. With each other. Always with each other. The years continued to unfold like pages in a well-loved book. Camden and Drusila celebrated each season together, marking time by harvests and birthdays and the slow, steady growth of their daughter. Linnea proved to be as stubborn as her mother and as thoughtful as her father, a combination that both delighted and occasionally exasperated her parents. She excelled at everything she tried, from farming to reading to the fighting skills Drusila taught her in the orc tradition. When Linnea turned 16, she asked her parents about her place in the world. "I am not fully human or fully orc," she said one evening, her voice troubled. "Where do I belong?" Camden and Drusila exchanged glances, and it was Drusila who answered. "You belong wherever you choose to be," she said gently. "Your mixed heritage is not a weakness, Linnea. It is a strength. You can build bridges that neither your father nor I could build alone. You can bring understanding where there was once only ignorance." "Your mother is right," Camden added. "The world is changing, slowly but surely. And people like you, people who embody both cultures, you are the future. You will help us build something better." Linnea absorbed this, and Camden saw determination kindle in her eyes. She began to travel, visiting both human settlements and orc clans, learning about both sides of her heritage. She became a translator, a mediator, someone who could speak with authority about the experiences of both peoples. And she carried with her the story of her parents, the orc woman and the farmer who had dared to love across boundaries. Camden and Drusila grew older together, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work, but their spirits still strong. They added a room onto the farmhouse, and then another, as they continued to take in those who needed shelter. Their table was always full, with guests from all walks of life sharing meals and stories. On a warm summer evening, when Camden was in his 60s and Drusila past her prime by orc standards, they sat together on the porch they had built. The farm stretched out before them, golden in the late light, and they could hear voices from inside the house, the sound of their extended family preparing dinner. "We have had a good life," Drusila said softly. "The best life," Camden agreed. He reached out and took her hand, and she intertwined her fingers with his, the gesture as natural as breathing after all these years. "You remember the day you found me?" Drusila asked. "I was dying in that field, certain my life was over, and then you carried me inside." "I remember," Camden said. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met. You were at your lowest point, and still you had not given up." "I was ready to give up," Drusila admitted, "but you gave me a reason to keep fighting. You gave me hope." Camden turned to look at her, at the woman who had shared his life for so many years. Her hair was streaked with silver now, and there were lines around her eyes, but to him, she was as beautiful as the day he had first carried her across his threshold. "You gave me hope too," he said. "I was just existing before you came into my life. You taught me how to truly live." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon. Inside, someone laughed, probably Linnea telling one of her stories. The farm animals were settling in for the night, their sounds of familiar comfort. A breeze carried the scent of growing things, of earth and life and promise. Camden thought about everything they had built together, and he felt a profound sense of gratitude. It had not been easy. There had been struggles, setbacks, moments when it seemed the world was determined to tear them apart. But they had persevered, held onto each other, and refused to let go, and they had created something beautiful in the process. "I love you," Camden said, the words as true now as the first time he had spoken them. "I love you too," Drusila replied, squeezing his hand. "Always." They remained there as the stars began to appear. Two souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life from courage and kindness and unwavering devotion. And as the night deepened around them, they knew that whatever time they had left, they would spend it together. Because that was what love meant. Not just passion or romance, though those had their place, but partnership, commitment, The choice to stand beside someone through every season of life, to face joy and sorrow together, to build something that would outlast both of them. Camden and Drusila had done that. They had taken a single moment of compassion when a farmer carried a dying orc woman inside his home, and they had transformed it into a lifetime of love. They had changed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. They had shown that bridges could be built, that hatred could be overcome, that love was stronger than any barrier. And their legacy would continue through Linnea, through the people they had helped, through the countless small acts of kindness that rippled out from their farm like waves on a pond. Long after they were gone, the story of the orc woman and the farmer would be told, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope could be found in unexpected places. As midnight approached, they finally rose and went inside, their hands still clasped together. The house was full of warmth and light, and the people they loved. Camden locked the door behind them, a symbolic gesture more than anything, and Drusila banked the fire for the night. They climbed the stairs to their bedroom, moving slowly but steadily, and prepared for sleep with the easy familiarity of long practice. When they lay down together, Drusila rested her head on Camden's chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "Good night, my love," he whispered. "Good night," she replied, her voice already drowsy. They drifted off to sleep like that, two hearts beating as one, their breathing synchronized. Outside, the world continued its eternal turning, but here in this room, in this moment, there was only peace. Camden dreamed of the first day he had seen Drusila, of carrying her inside his home. But in the dream, he saw it differently. He saw not just an orc woman in need of help, but his future, his partner, his wife, the love of his life. And he saw that every choice he had made, every step that had brought him to that field on that day, had been leading him to her. In the morning, they would wake together and begin another day. There would be work to do, meals to cook, conversations to have. Life would go on as it always did in its beautiful, ordinary way. But it would be a life shared, a life built on love, and that made all the difference. The sun rose on the farm, painting the fields in shades of gold. Birds began their morning songs and the roosters crowed. Inside the farmhouse, Camden and Drusila stirred, waking slowly to face another day together. And as Drusila opened her eyes and saw Camden's face, the first thing she saw every morning, she smiled. Because she was home. She was loved. She belonged. Camden saw that smile and felt his heart swell with affection. He leaned in and kissed her forehead gently. "Good morning, my heart." "Good morning," Drusila replied, and her voice was full of contentment. They rose together and began their day, moving through the familiar routines that had become the rhythm of their lives. And as they worked side by side, as they had for so many years, they were grateful. Grateful for the chance meeting that had brought them together. Grateful for the courage to love despite the obstacles. Grateful for every moment they had shared and every moment still to come. This was their story. The tale of the orc woman who collapsed plowing a field that was not hers, and the farmer who carried her inside. It was a story of compassion and courage, of love that defied expectations, of two people who chose each other and built a life together. It was a story that would be told for generations, inspiring others to look beyond their prejudices, to extend kindness to strangers, to believe in the possibility of love even in the most unlikely circumstances. But most importantly, it was their story. Camden and Drusila's. A story that had begun with a simple act of mercy and blossomed into a lifetime of joy. A story that proved, beyond any doubt, that love could conquer hate, that understanding could overcome fear, and that two hearts could beat as one regardless of the bodies that held them. As the day unfolded and they went about their work, Camden found himself humming an old tune his mother used to sing. Drusila joined in, her deeper voice harmonizing with his, and together they created something beautiful, just as they had created everything in their lives, together. The farm thrived under their continued care, yielding generous harvests year after year. Neighbors came and went, some staying for meals, others for longer visits. The house was always full of life and laughter, a testament to the welcoming spirit Camden and Drusila had cultivated. One autumn afternoon, as they were preparing for the harvest festival, Linnea returned home with news. She had been offered a position on the governor's permanent council for human-orc relations, a role that would allow her to continue her bridge-building work on a larger scale. "I want to accept," Linnea said, looking between her parents, "but it would mean spending much of my time in the capital. I would not be here as often." Camden and Drusila exchanged glances, a whole conversation passing between them in that single look. Then Camden smiled at his daughter. "You should accept," he said. "This is what you were meant to do, what we prepared you for." "You have given us so much," Drusila added. "Now it is time for you to give that same gift to the world. Go, build the future you dream of. We will always be here when you need us." Linnea embraced both her parents, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For showing me what love looks like, what courage looks like, for giving me a foundation strong enough to build on." She left the following week, and though Camden and Drusila missed her terribly, they were proud beyond measure. Their daughter was going to change the world, and they had given her the tools to do it. The years continued their steady march. Camden's hair went fully white, and his back began to ache on cold mornings. Drusila's strength, while still impressive, was not what it once was. They moved a little slower, rested a little more often, but their love never wavered. They celebrated their 25th anniversary with a party that drew people from miles around. Humans and orcs mingled freely, a sight that would have been unthinkable when Camden first carried Drusila into his home. There was music and dancing and more food than they could possibly eat. And at the center of it all were Camden and Drusila, holding hands and watching with joy as the world they had helped create flourished around them. Late that night, after all the guests had departed, they returned to their porch. It had become their favorite spot, a place where they could sit together and watch the stars. 25 years, Camden mused. It has gone so quickly. "And yet it feels like I have known you forever," Drusila said, "like we were always meant to find each other." "Maybe we were," Camden said. "Maybe that is what love is. Finding the person you were always meant to be with, even if the path to them is difficult." "Or maybe we chose each other," Drusila countered. "And that is what made it real. Not destiny, but choice. The choice to love, to stay, to build something together." Camden considered this. "I think you are right," he said finally. "Destiny might have brought us together, but it was our choice to make it last, and I would choose you again every single time." "As would I," Drusila said softly. She leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. They sat in silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, each lost in their own thoughts but together in spirit. And Camden thought about how far they had come, from that desperate day when he had found Drusila collapsed in a field to this moment of perfect peace. It had been a long journey with obstacles and setbacks and moments of doubt, but they had persevered, and they had won. Not just their love, though that was precious beyond words, but something larger. They had helped change hearts and minds. They had shown that the divisions between peoples could be bridged. They had created a space where others could follow, could dare to love across boundaries, could imagine a better world. And they had done it all by simply living their lives with honesty and integrity, by treating each other with respect and tenderness, by refusing to let hatred dictate their choices. As the night deepened and the temperature dropped, they finally went inside. Camden added wood to the fire while Drusila made tea, and they sat together at their table, sipping the hot liquid and talking quietly about nothing and everything. "I am glad I found you," Camden said suddenly. "Or that you found me. However you want to look at it, I am glad our paths crossed." "So am I," Drusilla replied. "You saved my life that day, Camden, in more ways than one." "We saved each other," Camden corrected. "You gave me purpose, meaning, joy. You made me whole." They finished their tea and prepared for bed, moving through the familiar rituals with comfortable ease. And when they lay down together, wrapped in each other's arms, they felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. The seasons turned as they always did. Winter gave way to spring, spring to summer, summer to autumn, and autumn back to winter again. Camden and Drusilla marked each passing year with quiet celebration, grateful for every day they had together. They grew frailer with time, as all living things must. But their spirits remained strong and their love never dimmed. They still held hands when they walked. They still kissed each morning and night. They still found joy in the simple act of being together. Linnea visited as often as her duties allowed, bringing with her news of the changing world. Human-orc relations had improved dramatically, with mixed communities springing up across the region. Trade was flourishing and cultural exchanges were common. The work was far from finished, but the foundation had been laid. "You did this," Linnea told her parents during one visit. "You and your story, you showed people what was possible." "We just lived our lives," Camden said humbly. "We just loved each other." "And that was enough," Linnea replied. "Love is always enough." On a crisp autumn morning, Camden and Drusilla celebrated their 30th anniversary. They were both in their 70s now, their bodies marked by age but their minds still sharp. They woke early as they always had, and Camden helped Drusilla into her favorite chair by the fire. 30 years, Drusilla said wonderingly. "Where did the time go?" "Into memories," Camden said, settling into the chair beside her. "Into moments like this, into a life shared." They spent the day quietly, reminiscing about their years together. They laughed over old stories, cried over losses, and marveled at how much had changed. And as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, they held hands and watched in comfortable silence. "I have no regrets," Drusilla said suddenly. "Not one. Even the hard times, the struggles, they were worth it because I got to face them with you." "I feel the same," Camden said. "You have been my greatest adventure, Drusilla, my greatest joy." That night, they fell asleep in each other's arms as they had countless nights before. And when morning came, Camden woke to find Drusilla still sleeping peacefully beside him. Her breathing was slow and steady, her face relaxed. He watched her for a long moment, memorizing every detail, and felt a wave of love so intense it took his breath away. She woke a few moments later, and her eyes found his immediately. "Good morning, my love," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "Good morning," Camden replied, and he leaned in to kiss her softly. They rose and began their day, moving a little slower than they once had, but still together, still in sync. They tended the farm with help from neighbors and hired hands, their roles shifting from active workers to advisors and overseers. But they were still the heart of the place, the foundation on which everything was built. As the years advanced, their health began to decline more noticeably. Camden's heart was weak, the doctor said, and Drusilla's joints ached with arthritis. They spent more time resting, more time simply sitting together and enjoying each other's company. But they never complained. They had been given more time than either had dared hope for, and they were grateful for every moment. One winter evening, as snow fell softly outside their window, Camden and Drusila sat by the fire. Linnea was visiting, and she had just put on a pot of tea. She watched her parents, saw the way they leaned toward each other, the way their hands were intertwined, and she felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I love you both so much," she said suddenly. "I hope you know that." "We know," Camden said, his eyes never leaving Drusilla's face. "And we love you. You have been our greatest gift, Linnea, our legacy." "You have made us so proud," Drusila added. "You have taken what we started and made it something even greater." They talked late into the night, sharing memories and dreams, laughter and tears. And when Linnea finally retired to bed, Camden and Drusilla remained by the fire, unwilling to let the evening end. "You ever think about what comes next?" Drusilla asked softly. "After this life," Camden was quiet for a moment. "I like to think we will be together," he said. "Whatever comes next, wherever we go, I believe our souls are bound. We will find each other again." "I believe that too," Drusilla said. "Because this love, what we have, it is too strong to end. It has to continue somehow." They fell asleep there by the fire, wrapped in blankets and each other. And they dreamed of fields of gold, of endless summers, of a place where there was no pain or prejudice, only love. Camden passed away first, on a warm spring morning 2 years later. He went peacefully, surrounded by Drusilla and Linnea, his hand clasped in Drusilla's. His last words were simple: "I love you, always." Drusilla held him as he slipped away, and though her heart shattered, she did not break. She had loved this man for over 3 decades, and she would carry that love with her for whatever time she had left. She lived for another year, tending the farm with Linnea's help and honoring Camden's memory in everything she did. She spoke of him often, keeping his spirit alive through stories and remembrances. And every night, she would sit by the fire in the chair that had been his and feel his presence beside her. When her time came, it was also peaceful. She closed her eyes in the bed she had shared with Camden for so many years, surrounded by the family and friends she had made. And her last thought was of that first day, when a kind farmer had found her dying in a field and carried her inside, changing the course of both their lives forever. The farm passed to Linnea, who continued her parents' legacy. She maintained it as a place of welcome, where humans and orcs could come together in peace. She told the story of Camden and Drusilla to anyone who would listen, ensuring that their love would never be forgotten. And in the years that followed, as the world continued to change and grow, people would speak of the orc woman and the farmer with reverence. They would talk about the courage it took to love across boundaries, the strength required to build bridges instead of walls. They would remember that single act of compassion, when a man carried a dying stranger inside his home, and how it had rippled out to touch countless lives. Because that was the truth at the heart of Camden and Drusilla's story. Love, real love, had the power to change the world. Not through grand gestures or dramatic actions, but through simple kindness, daily commitment, and the choice to see the humanity in everyone, regardless of the color of their skin or the shape of their face. Camden and Drusilla had lived that truth every day of their lives together. They had built something beautiful from nothing, had created hope from despair, had proven that love could overcome any obstacle. And their story would continue to inspire long after they were gone, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of commitment, and the eternal nature of true love. In the end, that was their legacy. Not just the farm, or the improved relations between humans and orcs, or even their daughter's important work, but the simple, profound truth that they had lived and loved and shown others that a better world was possible. One act of kindness at a time, one loving choice at a time. one shared moment at a time. And somewhere, in whatever realm waited beyond this life, Camden and Drusila were together again. They walked hand in hand through fields of gold, their bodies young and strong once more, their love eternal and unbreakable. They had found each other in this life, and they would remain together for all eternity. Two souls bound by a love that transcended death itself. This was their story, from beginning to end. A story of hope and healing, of courage and commitment, of love that changed everything. And it was a story that would never truly end, because its message would live on in the hearts of all who heard it. That love, in all its forms, was the most powerful force in the universe, capable of bridging any divide and healing any wound. Camden and Drusila had proven that truth beyond any doubt, and the world was better for it.